Evelyn adjusted her scarf as she stepped into the grocery store, the cool autumn breeze still clinging to her cheeks. The store, with its familiar fluorescent lighting and quiet hum of shopping carts, was one of the few places she ventured regularly. It wasn't out of necessity. She could have easily ordered everything online, but it gave her a reason to step out of her house, to feel part of the world, even if only for an hour or so. At 54, her days had fallen into a predictable rhythm. Mornings were for coffee and crossword puzzles, afternoons spent reading or tending to her modest garden, and evenings filled with reruns of old sitcoms. It wasn't a bad life, but it was a quiet one. Too quiet. The silence of her empty nest, after her children moved out years ago, had grown heavy. As she perused the produce aisle, her hand reaching for a ripe avocado, a voice startled her from her thoughts. "Excuse me, is this the trick to finding a good one?" She turned to see a young man holding an avocado in one hand, a sheepish smile on his face. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, his dark hair slightly tousled and a hint of laughter in his warm brown eyes. Evelyn felt a small, unexpected flutter in her chest. "The trick is to give it a gentle squeeze," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "If it yields a little but isn't too soft, it's ready." He followed her advice, nodding as if she'd just revealed a great secret. "Thanks. I'm hopeless at this stuff. My sister's coming over for dinner, and she's a health nut. Avocado toast, apparently." Evelyn chuckled softly. "Sounds like she has good taste." He smiled again, a bit wider this time. "I'll take your word for it. I'm Sam, by the way." "Evelyn," she replied, surprised by how easily her name rolled off her tongue. Their conversation continued for a few minutes, light and pleasant, before they parted ways. Yet, as she moved to the checkout line, Evelyn found herself glancing toward him, watching as he carefully selected items and read labels with an earnestness that made her smile. That night, as she prepared her own solitary dinner, Evelyn couldn't help but replay their brief exchange in her mind. It was such a small moment, a seemingly insignificant interaction, and yet it felt like a spark in her otherwise predictable day. For the first time in a long while, she went to bed feeling lighter. She couldn't explain it, but the encounter had planted something in her heart, something unexpected and warm. And for now, she let herself savor it. Evelyn didn't expect to see Sam again. It was a big grocery store in a bustling neighborhood, and she assumed their encounter would remain a pleasant, fleeting memory. Yet, less than a week later, as she wandered down the coffee aisle, there he was. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice bright with recognition. "You wouldn't happen to know which of these is good, would you? My coffee machine is judging me for my bad choices." She couldn't help but laugh. "That depends. Do you like it bold or mild?" "Bold," he answered quickly, leaning on the handle of his cart. "Life's too short for weak coffee." Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips as she pointed to a dark roast she'd tried before. "This one should do the trick. It's got just enough bite." "Thanks. You're becoming my grocery guru," Sam teased, his grin infectious. This time, their conversation stretched longer. They talked about coffee preferences, his sister's successful dinner visit, the avocado toast had been a hit, and the joy of cooking for others. Evelyn learned that Sam worked as a graphic designer and lived just a few streets away. He told her about the freelance projects that kept him busy and his dreams of traveling one day, while Evelyn shared snippets of her life, her passion for gardening, the books she loved, and her memories of raising her kids. It felt easy, natural, and strangely comforting, as if the years between them didn't matter. Their paths crossed more often after that. Sometimes it was by chance. Other times it felt like they were both hoping for it. Whether it was a quick exchange over the best brand of olive oil or a conversation about the weather, their interactions started to feel like little highlights in Evelyn's week. One evening, as Evelyn browsed the cheese section, Sam appeared again, this time with a basket full of ingredients. "I'm attempting lasagna tonight," he said a bit sheepishly. "Wish me luck." "You'll do fine," she said, laughing. "Just don't skimp on the bechamel." "The what?" he asked, looking genuinely puzzled. She explained, gesturing with her hands as she described the creamy sauce that would make or break his dish. His focus on her words, his genuine interest, made her feel something she hadn't in years seen. When they said goodbye that night, Sam's smile lingered in her mind long after she left the store. As she sat in her living room, sipping tea and flipping through a novel, Evelyn realized how much she looked forward to seeing him. It wasn't just his charm or their easy conversations. It was the way he brought a sense of novelty into her life, a spark of joy she hadn't even known she'd been missing. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt like her world was expanding instead of shrinking. And though she didn't know what this connection meant, she was eager to find out. Evelyn hadn't planned on analyzing her feelings. She told herself their interactions were nothing more than friendly coincidences, moments of levity in her otherwise predictable life. But the heart, she realized, had its own way of forcing truths to the surface. It happened on a crisp Sunday morning. Evelyn had decided to take a walk in the park, relishing the autumn air and the comforting crunch of leaves beneath her shoes. She wasn't expecting to see Sam there, sitting on a bench with a sketchpad balanced on his knee. "Evelyn!" he called, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Fancy meeting you here." She smiled, her pulse quickening at the sight of him. "You seem lost in thought. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," he replied, closing his sketchpad and gesturing for her to join him. "Just trying to capture the way the light hits these trees. It's tougher than I thought." She sat beside him, the bench cool beneath her hands. "Do you draw often?" "It's a hobby," he admitted, his tone modest. "Nothing professional, just something I enjoy. Want to see?" When he opened the sketchpad, Evelyn felt a rush of admiration. The lines were thoughtful, the shading delicate. His sketches weren't perfect, but they were alive, imbued with the same energy he seemed to carry effortlessly. She couldn't help but think of the contrast between his youthful passion and the quiet, restrained life she'd grown accustomed to. "This is beautiful," she said softly, running her fingers lightly over the edge of the page. "You have a real talent." He shrugged, his ears reddening slightly. "Thanks. It means a lot coming from you." The warmth in his voice startled her, but it was the way he looked at her, steady, kind, and just a little too long, that made her breath catch. They walked together after that, the conversation easy as always. He told her about the travels he dreamed of, backpacking through Europe, visiting the temples of Kyoto, and she listened, captivated by the openness of his dreams. She shared stories of the places she'd visited long ago, back when her life was a whirlwind of family trips and busy summers. She'd forgotten how much she loved telling those stories, and how much she missed the sense of adventure they carried. As they said goodbye at the park's edge, Sam hesitated. "You know," he said, his voice uncharacteristically shy, "I really enjoy talking to you, Evelyn. It's refreshing." She felt her cheeks flush. "I feel the same, Sam." That night, as Evelyn lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about him. His easy laughter, the way he listened, the way he made her feel lighter, younger, without even trying. She recognized the feelings for what they were, something deeper than friendship, something she hadn't dared feel in years. Her heart swelled with equal parts joy and fear. She couldn't deny the thrill of it, but what did it mean? What would people think? What would he think? Was she foolish for letting her heart wander where her mind told her it shouldn't go? Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her thoughts tangled in a web of hope and doubt. For the first time in years, her heart was awake, and it terrified her. Evelyn couldn't escape her thoughts. Over the next few days, the realization of her feelings for Sam consumed her. It wasn't just the way his smile lingered in her mind, or the way her heart skipped at the memory of his voice. It was deeper than that, an ache, a yearning she had long buried under the weight of practicality and time. The world around her seemed to conspire, throwing reminders of her age at every turn. At the grocery store, a magazine cover touted anti-aging tips she didn't care to read. On the television, a sitcom joked about the absurdity of an older woman dating a younger man. At the park, a couple strolled hand in hand, their youthful energy a stark contrast to her solitary walks. Evelyn began to question everything. Was it wrong to feel this way? Was it selfish? And even if she admitted her feelings, what could possibly come of it? Sam was in the prime of his life, full of ambitions and possibilities. She, on the other hand, had seen so much already. Marriage, raising children, building a life only to see it unravel into solitude. One evening, she found herself sitting at her kitchen table, staring into a cup of tea gone cold. Her reflection in the window looked weary, her mind a storm of doubt. She thought of Sam's laughter, his wide-eyed enthusiasm for life, and the way he made her feel as though she still had chapters left to write. But then came the fear, sharp and unrelenting. What if he saw her feelings as foolish? What if their friendship was shattered by her vulnerability? And even if he felt the same, what would people think? The whispers, the judgment, it all loomed too large. The next time she saw Sam, the tension within her was almost unbearable. They met by chance at the bookstore, and his face lit up as it always did when he saw her. He waved her over to the coffee shop inside, where he was flipping through a book about architecture. "Evelyn, you have to see this," he said, sliding the book toward her. "This design, it's like poetry in stone." She smiled, leaning in to study the page, but her mind was elsewhere. His enthusiasm was infectious, his voice a balm to her unease. Yet she couldn't fully meet his eyes. The weight of her feelings pressed down on her, and she wondered if he noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, tilting his head. "You seem distracted." For a moment, she considered brushing it off with a quick excuse, but something in his gaze, so genuine, so patient, made her pause. "I've just been doing a lot of thinking," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "About life, I suppose." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life's a lot to think about, but you always seem to find beauty in it. I admire that." His words hit her like a wave, unexpected and overwhelming. She felt the sting of tears threatening to surface and quickly looked away, feigning interest in the book before her. She didn't want him to see how deeply his simple kindness affected her. That night, Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, a book open on her lap but unread. Her emotions churned, a mix of longing, fear, and the faintest glimmer of hope. She realized that no matter how much she tried to push her feelings away, they had taken root. They were real, and they were hers. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to entertain the possibility that what she felt wasn't wrong. Love, after all, didn't adhere to the neat lines of age or circumstance. It was messy and unpredictable. It found you when you least expected it, and perhaps that was the point. But could she be brave enough to let it grow? Or would she let fear and doubt keep her from the spark of something extraordinary? As the clock ticked into the quiet night, Evelyn knew she couldn't avoid the question forever. Evelyn's thoughts were a storm, and as the days went by, she found herself replaying every moment with Sam, overanalyzing every word, every glance. She had come to a difficult realization. If she didn't act soon, the chance for something deeper would slip away, just like so many things in her life had. There was a tension that had been building inside her, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed to know if this connection was real, if the warmth she felt when they were together was something he shared, or if it was only a fleeting, solitary fantasy in her own heart. And so Evelyn made the decision. It started as a thought, almost absurd in its simplicity. Invite him over. She could easily dismiss it, tell herself it wasn't a good idea, that it might be too forward. But then the thought persisted. She imagined a quiet evening at her home, the two of them sitting by the fireplace, sharing a glass of wine, talking about life. The idea filled her with a strange mix of anticipation and fear, like stepping into uncharted territory. The weeks of internal struggle were now replaced by a sense of resolve. The fear of rejection, the worry about what others would think, all of it faded into the background. She wasn't asking for anything more than the possibility of something real, something that wasn't confined by the judgments of society or the weight of age. She wasn't asking for forever, but she wanted this moment, this opportunity, to exist between them. Evelyn spent the next few days preparing. She wasn't one to fuss over details, but today felt different. She found herself picking out a simple, yet elegant outfit, a soft, navy blue sweater paired with a pair of well-tailored jeans. She set the dining table with care, choosing a small bouquet of fresh flowers for the center, knowing that Sam would appreciate the thought, even if he didn't see it. As she moved through the familiar routine of cleaning, cooking, and making sure everything was just right, her hands trembled. She hadn't felt this nervous in years. Was this the right choice? What if she overstepped? But as she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, Evelyn realized that she had already made her decision. There was no turning back. She was opening herself to something raw, something vulnerable, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it. She called Sam later that afternoon, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "Hi, Sam. I was wondering if you're free tonight. Maybe you'd like to come over for dinner." There was a pause, and Evelyn could almost hear the surprise in his voice. "I'd love that. I didn't want to ask, but I've been thinking about you too." Her heart fluttered at his words, and she smiled softly to herself, relieved by his warmth. "Great. I'll see you around 7. 7 sounds perfect," he replied, his tone filled with a sincerity that made her breath catch. "I'll be there." When she hung up the phone, Evelyn stood in silence for a moment. She let the quiet settle over her, the anticipation becoming almost palpable. There was a fear in her, yes, fear of what would happen when Sam crossed that threshold. But there was something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. As she busied herself with the finishing touches, arranging the table, opening a bottle of wine, Evelyn realized that she wasn't just preparing for dinner. She was preparing for a moment of transformation. She was allowing herself to be vulnerable, to step beyond the limits of her life and take a chance on something unknown. What would come next, she didn't know. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to embrace the possibility that it might just be something beautiful. The doorbell rang at precisely 7, and Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She had never been one to anticipate visitors with such eagerness. The moment felt like a delicate balance between nerves and excitement, as though everything she had longed for was on the verge of unfolding. Yet she couldn't quite grasp it yet. When she opened the door, Sam stood there, looking as effortlessly charming as ever. His eyes were warm, and there was a glimmer of something in his smile that made her pulse quicken. Something beyond friendship, beyond casual companionship. It was an unspoken understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "Hi," Sam said, stepping forward with a bottle of wine in hand. "I brought this. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I thought a safe bet would be a Pinot Noir." Evelyn smiled, appreciating the thoughtfulness in his gesture. "Perfect. Come in." As he stepped over the threshold, she caught the faint scent of his cologne, a mix of cedarwood and citrus, that seemed to linger in the air even after he'd crossed into her space. It was a strange, almost intimate detail, one that made her feel like she was not just inviting him into her home, but into something deeper, something unspoken. She led him into the living room, where the soft glow of candlelight cast a warm, inviting ambience. The small bouquet of flowers on the dining table seemed to bloom in the soft light, and Evelyn felt a little thrill at how right everything looked, how right it felt to have him here in her world. "This looks wonderful," Sam said, his eyes scanning the room as he set the wine down on the table. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm glad you could make it. I've been looking forward to this." Sam nodded, giving her an earnest look that made her feel like she wasn't just a woman of a certain age but someone vibrant and interesting in his eyes. "Me too. I've been wanting to spend more time with you." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Evelyn hadn't expected. It wasn't just politeness, it was real. They sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed easily. They spoke of books they'd read, films they'd loved, the simple joys of life. But there was something more beneath the surface of their words, an undercurrent of something that neither of them fully acknowledged but both felt acutely. With every laugh, every shared glance, Evelyn's heart grew lighter, and the small, familiar fears she'd carried into the evening began to dissipate. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where Evelyn poured them each another glass of wine. Sam took a seat on the couch, and she joined him, a comfortable distance between them, but it felt like a space that was slowly shrinking. The closeness wasn't rushed, but it was undeniable. "Do you ever feel like life passes by too quickly?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft, almost contemplative. Sam looked at her, as though weighing the question. "I think about that sometimes," he said, his tone serious. "But I also think it's all about who you choose to spend time with, right? Time becomes meaningful when you're with someone who makes it feel like it matters." Her breath caught slightly at his words. It was the way he looked at her then, like she was more than just a woman he had met at the grocery store, like she had an importance in his life that he hadn't quite expected. And maybe, just maybe, she could say the same thing about him. Evelyn set her glass down and met his gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt warm, the soft flicker of the candles creating a sense of intimacy that was not just physical, but emotional. There was a quiet tenderness in the air, as if this moment was suspended, holding its breath. Sam shifted a little closer, his knee brushing against hers. It was a simple touch, yet it carried a charge that made her heart race. She wasn't sure what to do with the feelings that had been stirring inside her all evening. She wasn't sure what he felt either, but she could no longer ignore the pull between them. "I'm glad we did this," Sam said softly, his voice low, and Evelyn could feel the weight of those words in her chest. "I'm really glad you invited me." Evelyn smiled, her heart full, but she could feel the vulnerability rising inside her, an unfamiliar sensation, one she had pushed down for so long. "Me too," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, without any more words, Sam reached for her hand, his fingers gentle but firm around hers. The simple touch sent a spark through her, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of connection that wasn't just emotional, it was physical, too. In that moment, there was no age gap, no societal expectations, no limitations. There was only the two of them, sitting there together, with an unspoken promise hanging in the air, one that, for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to hope might be real. As Sam left her home that evening, Evelyn stood at the door, watching him walk away into the cool night air. The street lights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and for a moment, it felt like everything in her life had shifted slightly, just enough for her to notice. She closed the door softly behind her and leaned against it, her heart still racing, her thoughts swirling in a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. Was this really happening? Was this connection, this tenderness, something she could allow to grow, or was it just a fleeting moment that would fade like so many others? Her mind drifted back to their conversation, to the way Sam had looked at her, like she wasn't just a woman in her 50s, but someone who still had the capacity for passion, for adventure, for love. It was such a foreign feeling, one she hadn't allowed herself to indulge in for so long. The years had taught her to guard her heart, to put up walls against the vulnerability that could leave her open to disappointment. But Sam had softened that resolve. There was something about him that made her believe that love, true love, was not reserved for the young, for the ones with their whole lives ahead of them. No, love didn't follow a timeline. It wasn't defined by age, by the number of wrinkles etched on a person's skin, or the experiences they'd lived through. Love, she realized, was a timeless thing. It could come when you least expected it, in the most ordinary of places, like a grocery store aisle, or over a glass of wine shared between two people who simply understood each other. She stood there, her fingers still tingling from the brief touch of his hand. It was a touch that had said everything, more than words could express. It had been tentative, gentle, as if both of them were unsure of what the other might feel. But it had been real, and in that moment, Evelyn had allowed herself to believe that perhaps this could be something lasting, something that transcended the physical. What had she been so afraid of? She had spent so many years living by society's rules. What was appropriate? What wasn't? She had followed the expected paths, the ones that led to a quiet life of solitude after the end of her marriage, of fading friendships, and an unspoken resignation to growing older. But tonight had shown her something different, a new path, one that was hers to define. She had once feared that her age would be a barrier to any kind of meaningful relationship. It wasn't that Sam had said or done anything to make her feel insecure. He had been nothing but kind and attentive, but Evelyn couldn't help but wonder what others might think. The disapproving glances, the whispered judgments, the way people often looked at older women involved with younger men as though it were some sort of anomaly, a spectacle to be scrutinized. She had seen it happen in the lives of other women, friends and acquaintances who had dared to step outside the mold. And she had watched with a mixture of awe and fear, unsure if she could ever summon the courage to walk that path herself. But now, as she stood in her quiet living room, the walls felt different. The room, once a place where she hid from the world, now felt like the sanctuary of something new and bold. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable tonight, and she had liked it. She had opened her heart to Sam, just a crack at first, but enough for something to grow, for something real to take root. She felt a shift inside her, a deep, quiet understanding that love could come at any age, that desire and connection weren't reserved for the young, but for anyone brave enough to embrace them. Evelyn sank into her armchair and closed her eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of freedom. She didn't need to apologize for wanting companionship, for wanting affection, for wanting something more than the safe, predictable life she had been leading. She didn't need to hide the fact that she, too, was deserving of love and passion. Age didn't define her worth, and neither did her past. She smiled to herself as the thoughts settled in, and she knew without a doubt that whatever came next with Sam, she would be ready. There would be no more fear of the unknown, no more hesitations. She had a lifetime of experiences behind her, but tonight had taught her that love was not something to fear, but something to welcome with open arms. And so, as the night unfolded around her, Evelyn allowed herself to dream. Dreams of new beginnings, of shared moments, of love in all its many forms. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that anything was possible. The days following Sam's visit were a whirlwind of quiet anticipation. Evelyn found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, daydreaming. Each time she went about her routine, from her morning coffee to the evening walks through her neighborhood, she caught herself smiling, her thoughts drifting to him. The connection they had shared, the way it had unfolded with such ease and comfort, was unlike anything she had known in a long time. It was as if the years had been waiting for this moment, a moment when she could shed her doubts and embrace the possibility of something new, something unexpected. It wasn't just the physical attraction that drew her to him, though she couldn't deny the spark that flared whenever they were together. It was more than that. It was the way he saw her, not through the lens of age or time, but as a woman with her own stories, her own strength, and her own capacity for love. Sam had made her feel seen, something she hadn't realized she'd missed so deeply. One afternoon, Evelyn was sitting on her porch, sipping her tea, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sam. "I've been thinking about you a lot. I'd love to see you again soon." Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She wasn't sure why, but reading his words made her feel both vulnerable and excited, two feelings she hadn't experienced in such a long time. She tapped a reply, her fingers trembling just a little as she typed, "I'd love that too. How about dinner this weekend?" She didn't wait for his response before she stood up and moved into the kitchen. There was something about the simple act of planning something with him that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. The thought of seeing him, of spending more time together, filled her with a joy she couldn't quite put into words. Evelyn's journey over the past few weeks had taught her something profound. That love doesn't follow a script. It doesn't come when it's supposed to, or when it fits neatly into the boxes society has created for it. Love can happen at any time, in unexpected places, and often in ways that defy logic and reason. She had spent so many years hiding from the idea of love, convinced that it was no longer for her, that it was reserved for the young or for those who hadn't yet lived a lifetime of heartache. But Sam had shown her otherwise. Love, she realized, didn't come with conditions or limitations. It was a force that couldn't be controlled or contained, a thing that simply existed in the quiet moments between two people who cared for each other. As she prepared for their next meeting, Evelyn felt a calm resolve settle over her. She wasn't worried about what others might think or about the judgments they might pass. The world could keep its expectations. She had found something far more meaningful. She had found connection, and in that connection, she had found herself again, her desires, her joy, her ability to love fully and without fear. She knew that whatever the future held, whatever direction their relationship might take, it would be hers to decide. She was no longer defined by the years behind her, by the milestones she had missed or the ones still to come. She was living in the now, in the beauty of what was unfolding before her, and that was enough. With a final glance at her phone, Evelyn smiled, sending a final message before setting it down, "Looking forward to seeing you soon." And just like that, she allowed herself to fall into the warmth of the future she had dared to imagine, one filled with love, adventure, and the kind of connection that knows no boundaries, no rules, and no regrets.